Welcome to Prof E Plays. I'm Prof E, and in today's episode, what I'm going to do is describe some about prepping for D&D with kids, and kind of what do I do, what at least what I do for this next coming session. What I do kind of changes, right, session by session, depending on kind of what I can handle in terms of the time that I have, and in terms of kind of what I want to get out of that session, kind of where I want to move us in terms of narrative and this type of stuff. I don't have a whole lot of plans as far as that goes, but process naturally changes. So what I did this time, after the previous session, which you can see as the D&D with Kids live session that came out a couple weeks ago, that was the last time we played. And so in that session, just as a quick recap, we had my two PCs, my sons, uh, like infiltrated the Order of Lights, kind of their new mission that they're opening in the city where they are, because they were sent there specifically to steal a particular artifact. It was the Mace of Radiant Might or something like that. Right, so they broke in. They decided to use some combination of invisibility and disguise to get in there, grab this mace, and get out. It worked. Everything went absolutely perfectly, right? So it was a very short session, maybe like an hour or something like that, and that was with the boys getting very distracted by having a camera in front of them. They loved looking at themselves in the camera, let me tell you that. Anyway, so I asked them afterward. Specifically, I asked my 10-year-old that plays Malasar. I said, "Well, what would you like to do next time?" He said, "Well, I think the last one we did, oh, it was kind of boring." And I 100% agree. It was kind of boring because there wasn't a whole lot of tension, there wasn't a whole lot of conflict. Everything went too well, right? There were no combat at all, right? Because it is really just a, find some way to break in and get this thing and get out. And because they rolled so well, and because of the time that they went and the situation that was happening, there wasn't a whole lot of risk unless things went like really having there be risk relied on their rolls going very badly. And that's not what happened, which meant there was very little risk. And I tend to believe, I think it was Jonathan Haidt that I heard say this, right, that fun exists between boredom and fear, right? So there is this kind of intermediate level of risk or danger where we are not afraid and we're not bored, right? And that is where fun exists. So fun is between boredom and fear. And what happened this time was that there was too little risk. So it ended up feeling boring. It was what ended up happening. So I thought, that's a good point. So it was, what would you like to have? I said, well, I don't really like fetch quests. Well, son, you're going to get fetch quests. That's kind of where we are in terms of your character abilities, right? I don't really like fetch quests. I like uh, dungeons. I like dungeon delving. I think that's fun. Well, you can do a fetch quest that sends you to a dungeon. I've done that before. We can do it again. I was worried about dungeons because I have a sorcerer slash druid and a wizard. They don't do well in tight spaces, but if this is what they find fun, I'm going to do it. Right? So I said, okay, I'm going to do a dungeon delving, and we'll fit this into the narrative. So here's what's happening. So we know that the boys are working for the head of effectively the Mages Guild, or the Academy of Cavius is the name of the organization for them. And the head of the Academy of Cavius is kind of suspicious, right? And he seems to be very interested in collecting, right, all of these holy artifacts and bringing them in to make sure that they're stored in the vaults below the Academy. Yeah, boys don't have the experience to put together what might possibly be happening here. But that's what happened. That's what's happening. So I decided, well, okay. So I flipped through the DMG, which I have right here next to me. So right, my Dungeon Master's Guide. Okay, what else out there does radiant damage? This is the kind of thing that he's collecting at the moment, right? So I flipped through. I found a Sunblade. Sunblade, a very very cool thing. So highly recommend get a DMG, look it up. It's neat, right? So okay, yes. Right, so this is something, it's fairly rare, right? So it'd be important to be able to find this thing. It's not the kind of thing you're gonna find in the marketplace, right? Certainly, right? So let's stick a Sunblade, stick it in a dungeon, and have right hunter, who's the head mage, send out, right, our PCs to go and acquire the Sunblade, right? So then the problem is that I have to build this whole dungeon. I need help with this. Where do I find that help? The Dungeon Master's Guide, right? So it has inside of it procedure for procedurally creating a dungeon at random. I have done this before, and the results tend to be kind of funky, right? So I thought, well, I don't really like that. But what I do like is that there are enough tools in here that I can first flip through, find out something about what was the purpose of this dungeon when it was built, right? What is its state now, and what kinds of rooms might there be? And then I can think about what do these rooms look like in terms of their arrangement and their placement on a map, so then I can have something somewhat more logical there than what you might find if I just did this entirely randomly. So that is exactly what I did. Right. So I rolled up. I decided another part of my process here was that I know that eventually I want my PCs right to have to deal with the head of the academy. Right. He's going to end up being villainous at some point, right? We've already established he's suspicious. The friend Womson has established this with them, so they know this is not a surprise that something's eventually going to have to turn, right? Um, so at some point he's going to going to become a villain, but they're not high enough level to actually deal with him at this point with some of the abilities he has under the surface. So I thought, well, I need to get them leveled up. Since I use XP uh, in order to do leveling, a moment for why I do that. I like to use XP based on combat because most of what you get when you level up is mostly useful in combat. So the reason that I use XP is because you get XP by being in combat and dealing with things in combat. And what that means is that you are learning your abilities, you are kind of internalizing the way things work, you're developing strategies and the like, right? And by allowing for progression to happen in a way that is tied to how often you are in combat and how difficult those combats are, right? Then we are adding additional abilities as you are learning and mastering your abilities, which I think is really, really important for my boys because this is the first time they have played D&D ever, right? So they've had a little bit of role-playing experience with some other games, which kind of gave them taste of it. But D&D, part of the trait of it is as you level up, the number of abilities you have to manage increases significantly, right? So I want to give them some time. Right? And I want them to have to use these abilities to get to know these abilities. So that's why I use XP, right? So I thought, okay, how many XP do they need? How many encounters is there going to be with the kind of difficulty of encounter that I can throw at them without them necessarily dying, right? That kind of thing. So and then I also have kind of in the back of my mind some narrative things I want to do that I'm not going to reveal right now because my sons don't watch my videos. But if they did, right, I wouldn't want to spoil things too much. Right, so they're going to be sent to the Sunblade. I know what kind of XP they need, which means that I can design the type of encounters that they need. Right, so roll up a history. So I know what the history is like. That gives me some sense of the types of creatures there will be. I also know the type of environment it is in, which tells me where it is relative to the city. So this is not something where they're going to go down the stairs in a tavern and be fighting rats, which they did actually do a couple sessions ago. Instead, they're going to have to go somewhere else. So there's a traveling aspect here. Nice. It allows me to add in some additional encounters that are in open spaces where having a wizard and a sorcerer slash druid might be a little more useful. Right. So we have some open spaces where they can do some encounters. We also have, moving around within the city as they're getting ready. Some encounters can happen that way. And then when they get to the dungeon and they are in these enclosed spaces, then we have additional encounters. So my plan at the moment is that I'm going to split up the XP they need basically between two different dungeons. So I just designed the first one using again the Dungeon's Master's Guide. Right, so the Dungeon Master Guide, how I used this. Right, so first I got the purpose. The purpose of the dungeon tells you the types of rooms that are in it, right? And then I just rolled up rooms roll up rooms. And when you roll up the room, you're going to get a number of traits for it. I actually have these printed out here. Right, so I put all of this into a spreadsheet. Um, oh no, I put it into a table in Word, and I ended up with something like this. This is just my list of rooms, right? And so my rooms have first like a broad description of what it is. So room number one, this is a lounge to entertain guests. It's its purpose, right? And then what is the state that it's in? Well, ashes. The contents are mostly burned. Right? What is in this room? Well, it's an empty room with treasure. So I'm guessing there. I will describe this when we get there, kind of see what I get inspired by, and then I also have the specific treasures. So all of this are these are all things that I rolled on random tables. So what I did then, I as I went, and I had, some rooms are empty, some rooms have treasure, some rooms have monsters guarding treasure, some rooms have traps with treasures. You have these all these various combinations, right? And I added up how many XP they'd be getting based on the monsters I expected them to fight in the different rooms. Right? So the goal here was I had a certain XP threshold that I wanted. Right? So I just kept creating rooms until we had enough of them, right, to hit that XP threshold if they deal with all these monsters. My opinion is that if they manage to avoid the monster by moving strategically through the dungeon, good enough. So I'm kind of going back on what I said about XP before. Right. Good enough. I'll give them the XP for that. Right. So after I have these rooms, it was a total. It's going to be 17 rooms, which is more than I typically would do. Right. I then pulled out some graph paper, right, and made the dungeon like that. Right. So I can see all of my doors and all of that. And I designed it in such a way that it can fit on. I actually have a battle mat, right, that I can then sketch this out on as they go. Now, I also have some other stuff that I built. I mentioned this before, a tenfold dungeon, where effectively we have our small boxes. In the boxes, you can either have them so it's open face up, and then they're basically rooms that then you can flip together, or you can flip them over, and then they're basically buildings, right? And you can use them as buildings to build like urban areas and that kind of stuff. Right, so I have some of these that I built just out of cardboard boxes, that kind of thing. I mostly use cereal boxes, is honestly what I build things out of. Right, so I designed some of those. So I have some of those available, and then I pulled out my map. I thought, okay, what do I have to build? Oh my goodness, I'm going to have to build a whole bunch of stuff if I'm going to use this. But I'm not feeling doing that between now and Saturday when like my job as a professor, we're hitting the end of the semester. I have so much grading to do. I should probably be doing that now rather than recording this video, but I like this better. So, I'm recording this video right now. Um, yeah, we're doing that rather than making a bunch of boxes so I have 17 different little rooms for them to go into. No, I'm not going to build as many as I would need to do that. So instead, I have my battle mat. The battle mat's roughly the right size. For this, I'm going to have to like extend out like one square direction or something like that. Not a problem. Okay, so that's what we're doing there. All right, so I then have all these tools. Another thing that I did, right? Um, so I have the encounters. So things that I use for that, right? One is I just have notes about where in the monster's manual is this particular creature they're going to be dealing with. Another thing that I acquired, right, and I really do like these. I don't know that I make the best use of them yet, right, are these cards. These are creature and NPC cards. You can buy these at a game store typically. Uh, I haven't seen them in Walmart. They might be there. I don't know. Right. Right, so these are pretty cool. I think that we got this box for like $25, $30 or something like that. And it's kind of nice because on the one side, right, you have kind of a visual for some things, right? So there's what a mastiff would look like, right? And then you also have stat blocks on the other side. Some things don't have visuals, like here's what a guard looks like. Yeah, a guard does not look like that. Right. And then again, the stats on the other side. The stats just matching whatever's in the monster's manual. So this is kind of convenient if it's something that I know they're going to face. Rather than having to flip to page 247 or something, I can just pull out the card, which is nice. So that's another thing I do. And then the last thing I do is that I find that managing treasure is something that can be tricky when you're playing with kids, mostly because, at least my kids, their handwriting is very messy and they're not going to write very fast. And there's a trade-off between these things, right? So if I say, oh, you found a healing potion, right? For them to write this down, right? Either we're gonna have to slow way down so they can write it in a way that's legible, right? And then that slows everything down when you're trying to get through in a short period of time while they still have some kind of attention span, right? Or they write it down really fast, and later on we can't read it. It's completely illegible, right? So So how then do we deal with treasure? Like items lists are really inconvenient, right? So I got this idea from ICRPG, which was one of the first games that I actually had the boys try out. Right? But I think they were just attracted to the brand name of D&D, so that's why we ended up moving away from that. Even though I really like ICRPG, I had a lot of fun with it when we played together. So what I did, I took things from the again from the DMG, the various treasures they could possibly find. I rolled them up randomly, right? So I one thing I don't like dealing with different coins. I find it really annoying that Electrum exists. Like, okay, so how many copper pieces, silver pieces? No. Everything is gold pieces or decimals of gold pieces if we're going smaller. That's it. Right? Anyway, and mostly you're just gonna find gold pieces anyway, right? So what I do, I roll up, and if it's something that has items, then I just roll the items. I don't bother with the gold. If it is something that does not have items, and I roll on the appropriate table in the DMG, then I just roll up a number of gold pieces, right? And that's it. And then what I did, very much like I have the tables that I created that have um, all the different rooms in the dungeon, I also have printed out then, right, little slips that say exactly what it is they found. So this one is a potion of healing, and it says what it does. So then I have the description, right, that was originally in the DMG, just typed it up. There we go. Some of these descriptions you can find online, right? Or for example, if you found 420 gold pieces, there it is on a slip, right? You can update your your sheets and all of that as you wish. And I do each one individually, so I don't have like none of these slips say two potions of healing or anything like that on it. Instead, I have two slips that say a potion of healing. That way, it's very easy, right, for them to divide between them. I don't do that with gold pieces. I let them actually divide, like write that one down because that doesn't take as long. Last thing I do is when I don't like to spend very much money on this hobby, right? So what do I do then for miniatures? I have a few options. So one thing that I did actually go because our local game store apparently has a box of used minis that they just advertised. They said, "Hey, come and check out our box of used minis." Then, sure. So when I spent like $10 on was it like four minis or something like that. So I do have some actual minis. Nice thing about buying them used, somebody else painted it, so I don't have to deal with that. I'm not a good painter. I have like no experience painting minis. Right. Another thing, this is something my wife got me for my birthday. Okay. So just these little like wooden game pieces, which then I did actually paint this one. It seems kind of red and white, that kind of thing. So I can use these as just generics. And also another thing that I can use as a generic is this, where I printed out numbers, right, and then just glued it to literally a cereal box, right? So I have three there, three on the other side, right? Cereal box there, and a cereal box base, all of it hot glued. If I want something a little bit more descriptive, well, here we have, for example, a winged kobold, right, which I just found this picture on, it was like the Forbidden Realms, Forgotten Realms wiki or something like that, right? So Google image search, found that, printed it out, right, and really what I do, I take all this, put it in a Word file, and then shrink things down so I can have lots of them on that space, and then flip them over so I can fold. You don't have to do that necessarily, but I like it. Right, so there we go, fold it over, I glued it onto a little cardboard square. Right, so now here is a little cardboard standee, effectively. Okay. All right, so these are the kinds of things that I will do. Um, and I like that because it's fairly inexpensive. I'm literally just taking like trash and paper and glue stick and hot glue. Those are the things that I need, right? And I have, a handful of these things, right? Both kind of the generic ones for things that happen that might be unexpected, and also the ones that are a little bit more, I guess, the winged kobolds, that kind of thing. All right, so that is what I have done. We will see what happens. My 10-year-old has requested to play D&D again soon. I had to say, not tonight, son, because you have to go to bed because you have school tomorrow. Right? But we may do, I mean, I don't know that we'll do it as a live session or as a recorded session, but I do plan to at least have that session made available as for the next um, D&D with Kids live. whether it's live or recorded, whatever. So you can actually watch the session itself. We'll see how it goes. Personally, I'm going to warn them that I don't expect them to get all the way through the dungeon first turn. In fact, I don't think they're going to get to the dungeon. I have at least a couple encounters planned between where they are now and where the dungeon is. So my hope is that at the end of the next session, they'll get to the dungeon. If they get in it, that's fine. It's fine. I have the thing designed. Whatever. So that is a bit of my, I guess, creative process putting things together. So I hope this is potentially helpful, and I hope you tune in to see how it all works out in the next D&D with Kids on this channel. Prof E Plays, signing off.